Today, we're going to go over a step-by-step tutorial on how to make your bench press perfect. Now, keep in mind, this is in the context of hypertrophy, meaning muscle growth of the chest, of the front delts, of the triceps. So we're not here to press as much weight as we possibly can. We're here to get big. So the first thing we need to ensure is that the bench press rack is actually at the appropriate height for us. The way we're going to determine that is by lying down and basically reaching our arms up as high as possible. If you see that it's really, really low, so notice that it's not at about wrist height, but rather like at the height of my forearm, then I know that I need to move it up. Of course, this will depend on how wide or how narrow your grip is, because that will change the height at which you start. So we also have to determine the rack height in tandem with where we want our grip width to be. So there are two major choices for grip that we can have. The first is a relatively more narrow grip where our hands and our elbows are basically stacked directly over our shoulders. The second grip that we can really choose is a little bit of a wider grip, and of course everything in between these 2 points. Now, with a wider grip, our range of motion will sort of guide our elbows a little bit more out to the sides, while when we use a narrower grip, our elbows will naturally sort of fall a little bit lower. And so there are some subtle anatomical differences between these two grips. The narrower grip on one hand will train specific portions of the pec that the wider grip won't bias as much. So before we get back to the bench press, let's just clear up the distinction between a wide and a narrow press from an anatomy standpoint. All right, so when we're talking about the differences between wider arm paths and narrower arm paths, we sort of lay out a map of the pecs here. First of all, upper pecs pictured in blue, middle pecs pictured in red, and then lower pecs pictured in yellow. And we're assuming that when we do this press, we're in a relatively neutral posture, right? So we're not super arched in our backs, and we're also not super slumped. Whatever is comfortable for you, it'll probably be somewhere sort of a middle ground between those 2 points. If I use a little bit of a wider arm path and just sort of simplify this in your head, which of these tissues, if I am pressing in this direction, is going to most sort of align with that plane of motion or that direction that I'm moving the arm? It's not going to be these guys down here because they would be pulling the arm down. It's not really going to be as much these lower fibers of the middle pec because they would also have some sort of downward vector. It's going to more so be the upper shelf of the pecs, right? So the upper portions of the middle pecs and then the upper pecs together. So in general, for the same standardized flat press angle in this sort of neutral posture, any kind of wider arm path will provide a little bit more of an upper pec, upper shelf bias. And then sort of contrary to that, as you move the arm tighter to the ribs, and you have to sort of look at it from this perspective, bringing the arm tighter to the ribs, sort of at a comfortable, maybe 45 degrees away from the body-ish, or wherever is sort of comfortable for you. As you pull the arm back in this plane, relatively speaking, the fibers that run more horizontally from this angle, right, the ones that are going to stretch more in this kind of motion as compared to this kind of motion, are going to be those middle fibers, and specifically the lower fibers of the middle pec, as well as the lower pecs, right? So sort of from the middle of the pecs downward, those are going to be most biased in a flat press. When we use a little bit more of a narrow arm path. And then the recruitment will shift proportionally upward when we use a little bit of a wider path. So if you're looking for something that is more middle and lower pec specific, you're going to want to use a slightly more narrow arm path, and then vice versa for the upper portions of the pec, slightly wider arm path. Now, of course, there are other considerations to make if you change the angle of the bench, if you change the position of your trunk and so on, but that's a generalized rule of thumb for standardized flat pressing angles, that a little bit more of a narrow path is going to, again, bias these middle lower fibers, and then as we move a little bit wider, we're moving more into sort of upper pec and front delt territory. All right, so now that we have a good understanding of the fact that generally speaking, a narrower grip in this particular case will be a little bit more specific to the middle lower pecs as compared to the middle upper pecs, which will be a little bit more biased with the wide grip, you should select the grip which is more specific to either one of those goals. And when you lie down to actually start to do the bench press, there are a couple things in both cases that are similar to keep in mind. Whether I'm doing a wider or narrow press, I'm going to lay down and I'm basically going to pull myself into that position. And what you'll notice is naturally going to happen is your chest is either going to get pulled up a little bit when you do that, or if you go a little bit wider, it probably won't get as pulled up. But what a lot of people do is they really overemphasize this whole arching and like tucking the scaps thing. That's great for powerlifting in some cases, but in your particular case for hypertrophy training, just pull to where you imagine the bar to be going, assess sort of where your hands end up, and then use that as a starting point for the motion. So for me personally, I'm very, very comfortable with a sort of blended middle, lower pec, upper pec combination press with my arms right about here, sort of at 45 degrees where many of you will be. And this is another sort of key point, which is start from the bottom of the press. Don't necessarily just haphazardly grab the bar. So your grip will kind of be determined by where your arms end up. And then from there, you can just simply trace the grip up. Now, when we lock out, we want to fully lock the elbows and slowly bring the bar over where we're going to sort of lower down to. And then once we do that, we can sort of just start to press, right? We don't have to overthink this. It doesn't have to be more complicated than this. But what you will realize is that as you start to add load, where specifically in the range of motion that's going to be most comfortable for you might change. So for example, if I'm using the empty bar and I lower down to my chest and that feels really, really good, but then I start to add 1 plate, 2 plate, 2.5 plates, and I start to lower down to that point, and now all of a sudden it doesn't feel too good. Maybe my mechanics are different. Maybe something about the load that I'm using is inappropriate relative to the position and my tolerance in that position. Whatever it happens to be, do not be tied to the same range of motion that you start out with. Number one, in that sort of active rowing pattern that we describe. And number two, at lighter loads when you're warming up, your range of motion will change. And as a consequence, what portion of the range of motion you use when you use heavier loads on working sets can also change. So for me personally, I know historically with the bench press, my shoulders tend to get a little bit buggy if I always try to be touching my chest. And so what I opt for, instead of always just arbitrarily touching my chest, is I actually stop just shy of that point. Number one, to maintain the tension and to make sure that I don't just let the bar sink. But then number two, also to make sure that as I'm adding load and as I'm progressing, that I'm sort of standardizing a technique that's comfortable for me. And you personally may have anatomy that says touching your chest is perfectly fine, whether wide or more narrow. But for me personally, longer term, it hasn't worked out well for me. So for me, and this is just something that applies to any kind of press with any sort of barbell, whether it's this or whether it's an incline press, stop at the range of motion that is comfortable for you. So for me, what that looks like with heavier loads is I get set up, I come out, and this is about the range of motion that is most comfortable for me. Now, another tip in terms of setup and execution here is what you'll notice is I'm not really locking out fully. And that's not necessarily good or bad, but if you want to be most specific to the fibers of the chest, what you want to do is probably stop just shy of the bottom like I'm doing. But again, perfectly fine to go to your chest if you're comfortable doing that, as long as you maintain the tension. But what you notice is that a lot of you can just sort of chill out and hang up here and just sort of relax, right? This isn't necessarily going to be a bad thing if you spend a little bit of time up here, but a lot of people who don't feel their pecs spend a lot of time in the sort of top half of the range, allowing everything to sort of slump over forward like this, instead of just stopping shy of that lockout where they still have a lot of tension on those pecs. And not to mention the fact that this top half of the portion of the range, this will be a lot of triceps. Like if any of you want to assess this with an empty bar or with a little bit of weight, just do the top half of the motion. And what you'll realize really, really quickly is that it mostly ends up feeling like a ton of triceps, right? So from here to here is sort of our pec range, right? Range for the chest. And then from here to here is mostly like a triceps lockout thing. So if we want to be most specific to the pecs, I basically just like to stay in this bottom half, and I like to sort of just grease this groove of the bottom half to maintain tension on the pecs and to keep a lot of stress off of the triceps, because I like to sort of divide and conquer my exercise selections. But if you are doing something like a bench press so that you can target your chest and your triceps and your front delts all in one exercise, maybe you're short on time, then locking out would be a better solution. But if you want to be most specific to the chest, I would recommend not locking out with this particular setup so that you can keep tension on the chest throughout the entirety of your set. Another thing that not fully locking will do is it will prevent you from over slumping and trying to overreach the entire time. A lot of people who end up losing that trunk position right off the bat are trying to sort of press to a position where they're locking, but you definitely don't have to lock out. And again, as I mentioned, if your goals are really, really pec specific, getting, to the point where you're just shy of lockout is probably going to be a really good idea for you. Now, the last thing that I wanted to mention about just sort of technique and overall mechanics here is that whether you use a more wide or a more narrow grip, and you are still stopping shy of that lockout, it's more than likely that that bottom position is going to be really, really the hardest point of the motion. So you should expect that, and you should expect to get to a point where if you are going to true failure, you're not going to be able to get out of the bottom. So a wise choice would be to use a safety or something that's it's really just at a point just below that point of lock. So if you do actually fail, you have the opportunity just to basically dump the bar a little bit forward or something so that you can fail, and you can fail in a safe manner. A lot of people will just set up in a regular rack, but I personally prefer a rack like this if you have the option to do that, specifically for that reason, in that a big downside of the barbell bench press is not being able to fail safely. So if you can fail safely, that's a huge upside. So in order of operations now altogether, lie down, make sure you sort of retroactively set the rack height to whatever your grip is comfortable. Whatever grip you choose, whether wide or more narrow, depending on your goal, go to the end range of that, at least pull yourself into that position, and that will set your trunk. Then work upwards from there to where the grip would just sort of naturally align with your forearm, right? So I'm not angling my forearms inward like this. I'm not angling them outward like this. I'm angling them, boom, 90 degrees from the bar. From there, I'm going to grab the bar, make sure the bar is stacked over my wrists. I'm going to maintain that position, go down to where I'm comfortably sort of feeling that tension. Again, for me, that's just shy of the chest. And then I'm going to go back to that top position, basically making sure that I don't get past that lockout, as I mentioned multiple times. So from this point, again, you're just going to sort of grease the groove. This is where I basically like to end up with any sort of barbell bench, just because of the restrictions to the bar. And if you do want to use more range of motion because you find that the barbell is actually not enough for you, you feel like you have a ton of other range to stretch, well, then that's a great opportunity to use something like a dumbbell or something like a cable where you can get back and train that position. But the barbell bench press, for the goals that it accomplishes, is a fantastic implement if you can find the technique that works for you. But remember that these are generalized principles, and that what you do is sort of set up in a way that's comfortable for you, not necessarily that's comfortable for me. And just make sure that as you progress load and as you add more stress to your tissues over time with that load, and potentially with more volume of that load, just make sure that you're maintaining technique and that you're really paying attention to what your joints are telling you rather than just what your sort of ego-based, let me add more load brain is telling you. So if you have any questions about bench press, please let me know. I hope this was helpful.